Joining us on the Wester Hotline, a friend of the show, Mr. Matt Parrino, who would have been there yesterday for the Khalil Shakir press conference. Matt of the Shout podcast. I was listening yesterday, and he said something, and I picked up my phone and I texted him and I said, let's chat about it. Matt, good morning.
Good morning, guys. How are you?
We're good. I was, you know me, Matt. This is how it's going to work. You mentioned a trade for a receiver, and I thought, I've brought up the same name.
You probably already knew that Jeremy was calling at any moment when you just said the name.
Yeah, my spidey senses went off because, well, whatever. Let's get to some context on it, Matt, as we talk about the Shakir extension, which makes a bunch of sense. You know, we're waiting on Mac Hollins to see if there's something to come there. Before we get to the defense, they still do have this one big piece, this one big decision with their offense. And I said to earlier with Joe, you know, last year they were desperate and they went out and they made a nice move. They got Amari Cooper. Now they have a full offseason to make sure they're not that desperate again. I do still think that this is a primary position that they need.
Definitely. And I think that you look at the free agent class, and I know you guys have probably been talking about this quite a bit. I might have even seen a tweet from you on it, Jeremy. Like, you're digging through it and you're scratching and you're clawing and you're trying to find arguments for all these different guys. And to me, it's just Darius Slayton is where I land, and I just think he's going to be overpaid. I mean, if you look at some of the separation numbers last year, Slayton had himself a really good season. He's not been as hurt as I thought either. Like it feels like because we all play fantasy football, I'm always watching Darius Slayton's availability week to week, but he's actually played in close to 16 games every season, outside of one where he dealt with a couple nagging injuries. But if that number gets to 15, 16, 17 million, wouldn't you rather trade with a team that maybe has to kind of reshape who they are and what they're going to do? And who knows, maybe Mickey Loomis is just going to be that floating tire fire, right? Like the meme, like he's just going to keep spending until they show him the door. But I do think, I don't care what they say publicly, they can't be excited about what they have on their offense right now and maybe having to kind of start from scratch and blow it up a little bit. And if they do, I think Olave is a guy that could be had for maybe something less than maybe a DK Metcalf or some of the other big-time names that have been bantied about, and maybe not. And you're going to have to give him a contract on the other side. So we could talk through those things. There's also this, thing that we have to talk about, which is the concussion history and the fact that he didn't play half the season last year because of it.
Yeah.
But I think if the Bills were to make this deal, it would be because they vetted it. They believe in their ability to manage that kind of thing. I mean, Mitch Morse was a concussion away from never playing again, right? When they got him from Kansas City as a free agent in 19. They have a history here. They do a pretty good job of getting guys in a position to play with that ailment.
Yeah, he's had 5 documented concussions,
it's tough,
I think, in his career. But when he's on the field, Matt, like, especially for what the Bills need, which is speed and separation and an ability to play on the outside, beat man coverage, like, he kind of feels like the perfect player that they would need if he could stay on the field.
Yeah, and what's funny about this guy is, like, I was looking at Matthew Golden quite a bit in the lead up to the combine, and then he blew the doors off with the 4.29. And one of the reasons that made me gravitate to him was Lance Zierlein at NFL.com on his scouting report for him. The player comp was Olave. And I've been kind of thinking about Olave for a couple of years because, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's his brother, maybe his cousin, that's been like very vocal on social media about getting him out of New Orleans. And this happened maybe midway through last season, maybe around the concussion stuff. So he's always been kind of on the radar because, Jordan Addison is another guy. Like, if you go back to that draft, he has the same kind of skill set and traits you just mentioned, Joe, that I think the Bills are seriously lacking. And if you can't get Golden in this draft, then maybe they can. Like, maybe that's the guy that they zero in on, they go up to get him. Maybe that ends up being the play, and he falls into that category. But I think that specific skill set and player is what they should be searching for.
So there's a little bit of the timeline on Olave. The Saints have to decide on the fifth-year option this year, like soon, right, by May. That's the timeline for fifth-year options. If they don't, he's a free agent at the end of next season. If they do, well, maybe they do it because that gives them more if they do want to trade him. On Olave, as an idea, he is a Matt Harmon reception perception darling. You remember maybe 2 years ago, Devontae Adams, or who was it, had the perfect route tree, good at every single route. I think it might have been Devontae Adams.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
But Olave is perfect in all except one. Like, he is the near perfect route tree. And 87th percentile against man coverage and 77th against zone. Like, this is a true number one that's been kind of stuck there. And again, concussions, injuries, that's a thing. That's something to obviously be concerned about. The point that it drives home, Matt, I think, is how hard it is to find these guys. And the fact that, Brandon Beane, he knows this. The trade for Diggs, he makes his swings. Beane's not afraid to swing. He even said that some version of that this offseason. I'm not going to live in fear. I'm not going to be afraid to take a swing. And that's why Bills fans, I think, can lean into the idea of a Metcalf trade, Olave, if you want to throw him in there, Myles Garrett, because while Beane might represent you're never one player away, he is one to show he is willing to do that. And I almost expect it in a year like this, that they're going to go big game hunting, blue chipper hunting, wherever it might be.
I agree. I think that it's got to be at least one big swing. And what happened 2 weeks ago when we found out the number at the salary cap and them basically starting at zero and the work they could do to open up, upwards of like $60 million if he wanted to get really super aggressive for this season. I don't even think he has to be that aggressive to take the kind of swing that we're talking about. They're still going to go, they're still going to find bargain pieces. I mean, he's really good at hitting in that second and third wave. You think about Leonard Floyd, you think about DeJuan Smoot, who I know his numbers don't blow you away, but he was really important. When he was on the field, I think defensively they were better. He can find those kind of plug-and-play pieces on both sides of the ball. He's proven that. But you do need those big pieces, and I don't think anybody can downplay, to your point, what Diggs meant to this team, especially in the first 2 years of that deal. And really, that's what you're looking at with a Myles Garrett or a Trey Hendrickson or Max Crosby, DK Metcalf. That's a trade for 2025 and 2026 to maximize this current roster. And listen, that's going to have to be paired with the Philadelphia Eagles approach and to a lesser extent the Chiefs of drafting and finding starters. That's been the problem for Beane. He's found a lot of really good players in every round over the course of his time here. But it hasn't really happened in bulk, right? And I think that's where it's happened a little bit more recently for the Chiefs. They had that one draft coming off of the Super Bowl where they found 5 or 6 starters that were playing for them in the playoffs the next year. The Bills have never really had a draft like that. So if you compare a draft like that this year, and that's kind of why I asked the question of Sean at the Combine, that I don't think he truly really understood where I was going, and I hope to kind of follow up at the owners' meetings. Pairing the vision for the evaluation with Brandon Beane's staff with how they're going to be implemented in the scheme on offense or defense with the coaching staff. They spend a lot of time together at these events at this time of year trying to figure out what are the best players for what they do. But a lot of times it doesn't feel like that meshes or matches up when we get to football in September.
Are you thinking about some of their recent picks for that? Kincaid and Coleman,
Dwayne
maybe?
Carter, Keon Coleman, Dwayne Carter, Cole Bishop. And I know, Bishop kind of has to be taken out of that because he missed all of training camp, and I get that piece of it. But there just seems to be, at times, an unwillingness for the staff to, really lean into the player that you spent all of this time evaluating and giving them an opportunity. I still kind of hold the coaching side a little bit accountable for the lack of Kyer Elam popping in this defense. He's never been on the field, guys. He's never been really handed a job and saying, let's see what this looks like over the course of time. It's always been a split. It's always been, when he was playing early in his career, when he played the most, it was in tandem with Christian Benford. And I get it. Trey was here. They had other pieces. I think Dane Jackson was still a big part of things. But I don't think you can make a pick like that, an aggressive trade-up in a first-round situation, and not have the proper plan for that player on the other side. It happened with Cody Ford at the beginning of this build, who went on and hasn't been great, but has at least found, stops in certain places. And last year was playing meaningful football for a Bengals offense that was really good.
Does Shakir fit this too? I mean, he's not a bold thing, but Shakir was a talent that they had, clearly. And yesterday that was a theme of the press conference where he was just kind of there. had ability. They liked him as an idea. And what did it take until halfway through year two?
Yeah, halfway through the 23 season before it really got going.
Yeah, I mean, he's on a team that goes out and adds Cole Beasley. They don't really trust Shakir. And, Matt, I don't necessarily buy the idea that McDermott doesn't trust rookies at all, but there are definitely spots where they protect them and then they keep them off the field. And Shakir, he was a little bit of a, maybe not late bloomer, but a mid to late bloomer for them.
Yeah, and I agree with that, too. I'm not saying that they completely don't trust rookies. There's been a lot of spots where guys have been put in and they've been counted on. And McDermott, over the last couple of years especially, has emphasized that, listen, in modern football, like, you have to trust your young players more than ever. And I think they've shown an ability to do that a little bit more. I think maybe Carter's even an example of that. There wasn't really a role for him to start and play a bunch of snaps. So I agree with that piece of it. But Shakir's interesting because he said yesterday when we talked to him, his career didn't really take off until Joe Brady took over. So it was almost like the staff that was in place when they drafted him, Dorsey, taking over when he did, never really had the right vision for Shakir and how they can deploy him. And now he's become not only Josh Allen's most trusted weapon in the passing game, but the guy that's really fulfilled what they really been looking for 3 or 4 years, and that run after the catch ability. That I think that's an important kind of experiment to say, okay, this is where we maybe fell short early with Shakir. This is what we realized when Brady took over. Let's implement that now in year 2 with Bobby Babich on the defensive side of things, because there's a really good chance they could have to draft a cornerback. Maybe that number 30 pick ends up being a safety if the top kid, Inwanwara, if I'm saying his name right, is there. And I know I've seen him mocked to the Bills a couple times. Safety isn't off the table. I mean, DeMar Hamlin's probably going to sign elsewhere unless they get him back on a very low number. And Cole Bishop is one of the safeties. I don't think you're writing in pen Taylor Rapp at that other safety spot next season.
Before we get to the defense, I do want to shift gears over there, but to get to that point about rookies, how concerned should Bills fans be about Keon Coleman, if at all, the way that they talked about Coleman and their disappointment with him, which is the kind of stuff they could just tell him. The fact that they told us all of this, to me, is what's most noteworthy. What was your read of what they've said about their rookie receiver?
I think if I'm a Bills fan, I'm happy about this because there's nothing about the second half of Coleman's season after the injury that gets you excited or that you're happy with as a fan or a coach, or probably Coleman himself, probably why some of these videos are circulating of him, training already this offseason. But Sean never talks like that publicly about players. Very, very rarely. Even Elam, who he's been critical of at times, has never been so outwardly critical through the media. So I think there's a bit of a message there, and I think that they believe in the guy. I think one of the reasons that Bean has pushed back so much, at every stage on the Worthy stuff, is because of how much he liked Coleman during the draft process. And if you go back to his combine workout, of course, the 40 didn't blow you away. The separation numbers don't blow you away. But where he really excelled was in that gauntlet drill, where I think a lot of the recent successful receiver stories, you're starting to see that translate more to the field. And so I think that they believe in Coleman. And without anybody else on the roster right now, with Cooper being a free agent and the unknown of the draft and whether or not they're going to pull one of these trades, they need Coleman to be, whether it be a 1A or 1B next year, they need him to be in that area coming into year 2 as a high pick. I know it was a first-round pick, but number 33, you might as well be.
Matt Parrino with us. What about Kincaid for next year? Because weren't they kind of equally as sour is not the right word, but the questions about Coleman and what they said about him coming back from the injury. I mean, every time I heard McDermott speak since the season ended and he's been asked about Kincaid, he's brought up that he kind of wants him to be stronger.
Yeah, get in the gym, bro. Right? That's the message. I think that's the thing for Kincaid, even going back to some of his college prospect reviews, that's what people were saying about him. And I don't know if what's been the delay there, if there's been injuries, if maybe going into year 2, he didn't get as big as they would have hoped that he would be, and that affected him, whether it be in the blocking game or elsewhere. So I think the message is set in that department. But the reason I don't worry about Kincaid as much is I think that, Brady has another offseason to really get in the lab and figure out what they're doing with these two tight ends, how to be more effective when they're both on the field together. And Allen almost took it personally at his season-ending press conference at the questions that were kind of popping up about Kincaid, like people questioning his performance down the stretch. Obviously, he played through the injury and he stood up for his guy, but he put out a lot of it on himself, like poor placement on passes. Like I could think of like 3 or 4 instances, and of course the knee injury play was one of them, where Kincaid had to go make a play on a ball that was just completely uncatchable. So I think from Allen's perspective, as good as he was in his MVP season, him and Kincaid have to get on the same page a little bit better this offseason. If that means multiple sessions where they go and work together in California, if they get together as a group, which Shakir alluded to yesterday that they're planning to do again this offseason, that has to be something that they continue to get on the same page. I'm not putting it all on Kincaid, but year 3, typically for tight end, in the conversations, I remember talking about this with Lee Smith when he was in Buffalo, and he said, usually for tight ends, I don't really evaluate anything too critically until their 3rd season because there's so much getting thrown at you, especially for guys that aren't good in the blocking part of the game and are in so many offensive line meetings and trying to figure those things out. Usually it all comes together for a guy in their 3rd year. This is a huge year for Dalton.
Matt Parrino on the Western Hotline. All right, to the defense, before we go, do you have a favorite idea or approach even? I mean, Myles Garrett's out there, Max Crosby, Khalil Mack, as we're talking just edge ideas. Of course, the draft is stocked full of defensive linemen. Safety, I agree with you. Safety could definitely be in the mix, and I've seen the Bills mock a safety or two. What approach do you think is the best for the Bills right now?
Right now, my favorite idea is not using any of the draft capital if you could help it in this year's draft, because the defensive line crop is so good, on a trade for one of these big defensive linemen. Now, here's the plan for that. I still think they should do it, but I think that they should try to stock the cupboards with the talent that's here. And then on the other side of June 1st, that to me is like the prime area to cut Von Miller, get that full $17 million in cap space, and then be able to operate on the other side of things. Right now, Cleveland and Las Vegas, whether or not they're playing it close to the vest or this is how they truly feel, it feels like they're trying to still compete next season. Maybe they think they're good enough. Well, you get to the training camp, you get to the preseason, then especially the regular season, and that's going to become abundantly clear that they're not going to be competitive in the division specifically that they're in. So I think a Garrett trade or a Crosby trade is much more viable for next year. And then the selling point, if you're Bean, is you need draft capital to pull off what we did for Josh Allen if you're going to go up and get the guy that you want in the 2026 draft. Let us give you our 1st and 2nd rounder next year. We have all these draft picks that we had in 2025. We're not as worried about that. We'll figure that out on the other side of things. Now make a play to go try to win a Super Bowl, whether it be Garrett, whether it be Crosby. I don't think the trade happens till maybe the summer or maybe into the fall.
I like that. It is. You have to, of course, hope that the game doesn't actually run until after June 1. But, you're kind of just you're playing patient. You're waiting for the market to come down. You don't want to spend this capital. Into next year, all the picks have been spent, and that's a different conversation. So it makes sense to me. Matt Parrino on the Western Hotline as we chat with him about the Bills offseason. What else is new, huh? We're waiting for the league year to open.
I've had no reason to text Matt about UFC, in like 3 years.
Yeah.
There's nothing happening there right now.
We're just in the doldrums of that sport right now. It's been such a downer.
Yeah.
They don't have any really big stars. The biggest thing in the fight game right now is Jake Paul, as horrible as that is to say out loud. But next week, the tampering period opens on Monday. I'm going to Marcel Louis-Jacques' wedding this weekend in Miami.
Nice.
And so I'm flying back on Monday. So that'll be like, I'll hit the ground, and it's like, let's get after it.
All I'm saying is that wedding's like a perfect rom-com football reporters get together, big story hits during, one of the big moments in this could be a lot of fun. So enjoy.
DK's a bill Sunday
right in the middle
of the ceremony.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. Or the Dolphin, Tyreek gets traded. Marcel's going on around the horn from the reception. Stuff could happen. All right. Thanks, Matt. We'll talk again.
Sounds good. Take care, guys.
Bills beat reporter Matt Parrino, Syracuse.com, host of the Show podcast, he and Ryan Talbot. They do great work.